what does the Quran actually say about how Muslims should feel and should interact with Jews and Christians? Okay? And it says positive things, it says critical things, and I'll try to give you a little bit of both. So this is something, of course, very positive. Truly those who believe and those who are Jews and the Christians and the Sabians. The Sabian seems to be a kind of religion that was practiced maybe in southern Iraq. Whosoever believes in God in the last day and performs righteous deeds shall have their reward with their Lord. No fear shall come upon them, nor shall they grieve. Right? I think it's hard to get a clearer statement of the salvific possibilities of Judaism and Christianity than this, right? Those who believe, it's interesting, that is referring to Muslims, as in confessionally Muslims, and those who are Jews, and the Christians, and the Sabians, and then it lumps them all together as a different kind of believer, uses that same term again, whoever believes in God in the last day and performs righteous deeds. Right? It's a very general description of the type of people who will enjoy a blessed hereafter. Right? Those people will have no fear, nor shall they grieve, meaning in the hereafter. Right? They shall be rewarded for what they've done. Okay? This is in Surah 2. There's an almost identical verse in Surah 5 as well, 569. Okay. There's another passage that talks about how Muslims should deal with religious differences between Jews and Christians. This comes from the 29th chapter of the Quran. And dispute not with the people of the book, save in the most virtuous manner, unless it be those of them who have done wrong. And say, we believe in that which was sent down unto us and was sent down unto you. Our God and your God is one, and unto him we submit. Right? Okay. So here, I know that there's been a lot of people in the news who will say things like, and I don't know, nasty comments that people put after news stories on the internet. Those Muslims worship the moon god, or they worship a different god. It's not my God. I worship Jesus. They worship a different God. Well, that's true. Muslims don't worship Jesus, but nonetheless, here it's a clear statement that at least from the Muslim perspective, the God that Jews and Christians worship is also the God that they worship, right? There's one God. That God also revealed Judaism and Christianity. Okay? And so this is what you're supposed to say to them, right? And unto him we submit, or literally, we are Muslims for him, or we are Muslims toward him, right? We submit ourselves to God, right? And indeed, Muslims did engage in intellectual discourse and in theological debate with Jews and Christians, and specifically with Christians, most specifically with Christians in their early period. Right? They were interested in Christian theology, and the caliph would do these things in Baghdad, particularly in the early Abbasid period, and he would get some great Muslim theologian, and he would bring some Christian theologian, and they had to debate in front of the caliph, and then the caliph would decide at the end who won the debate. I think probably the Muslim usually won the debate, was determined to win the debate. But they were very interested in Christian theology and in understanding it as well. Okay. Again, say we believe in God and in that which was sent down to us, and in that which was sent down to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, meaning, of course, the 12 tribes of Israel, and thereby including all of the prophets and the judges and prophets that came after them. And in what Moses and Jesus were given and what the prophets were given from their Lord, we make no distinction among any of them. We make no distinction. This is a phrase that's repeated elsewhere also in the Quran. What do you think that means, we make no distinction between any of the prophets?
None are superior or more important than another? Or?
Well, that would be your initial thought, right? It was my initial thought too. In a way, yes, but not entirely. The Quran does talk about, obviously, some prophets as having a more fundamental role than their sort of major and minor prophets.
You don't call them Jews or Christians? I'm just guessing.
Right, you don't do that. But the idea is that you can't make a distinction about which ones you're going to believe in and which ones you're not. Right? So Muslims are required to believe in all of the prophets that are mentioned by name in the Quran. They have to believe in them as prophets, of course. And they are required to believe in the Torah and the Gospel as revealed revelation. Right? We talked about the fact that Muslim doctrine says that those scriptures are no longer in their perfect form, which means Muslims wouldn't take them as a scriptural text that they could rely on. But they do have to believe that they are originally revealed texts. Right? That's very important. Okay, so we make no distinction among them means you can't choose to believe in some prophets over others. And really, in this is one of the reasons that's given for why Muslims are specifically referred to as believers in the Quran, whereas even Jews and Christians, while their religion is validated and their scriptures are validated, are not usually referred to using this term believers. Because a believer is one who believes in all the prophets, right? So they would say Jews and Christians believe in some of the prophets, but they don't believe in all of the prophets, right? Because Jews don't believe in Jesus, and they don't believe in Muhammad, and Christians don't believe in Muhammad. So they don't believe in all of the prophets. So to be a believer is to believe in all of the prophets and all of the books. Okay. Oh, wait, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. At the same time, the Quran is critical of both traditions, and in different ways. So it tends to be critical of, sometimes they're just referred to as the children of Israel or the Jews, in ways that are very similar to the way the Tanakh is critical of them, right? And as I picked this particular example because you can see that some of the accusations that are made against the Jews repeat things that you find, for example, in the books of the prophets, in the Nevi'im, in the Tanakh, right? The same kinds of critiques. Okay, so the criticism of the Jews or the children of Israel in the Quran centers around their not keeping the covenant, that they break the covenant or at times break the covenant. So here, and we raised the mount over them at the taking of their covenant, and we said, enter the gate prostrating, and we said to them, do not transgress the Sabbath, and we took from them a solemn oath. And so the Sabbath is really important in the Quran. It's very critical of Jews who do not keep the Sabbath. And I find that interesting because Muslims don't have a Sabbath in that sense, right? I mean, today is Friday, it's the day of congregational prayer, it's the day Muslims will come together and worship as a community in the mosque. But it's not a Sabbath in this sense, right? I mean, the Sabbath in the Jewish sense is really you don't do any work. And there is another passage that, again, explains how some Jews in a particular village broke the Sabbath by fishing on the day of the Sabbath. So it's clear that it's not just talking about praying and coming together as a community, but it's talking about this traditional Jewish and Torah idea of the Sabbath being something in which you do no work whatsoever. And that is not it's not in Islam, it's not really in Christianity, except Christians sometimes call Sunday the Christian Sabbath. But really it's something that's very particular, a ritual that's very particular to the Jews. And so the Quran continually upholds that, right? It says you have to continue to practice this. And this is, I think, a good indication of the acknowledgement in the Quran that even though there might be one God, monotheism is the central principle, that nonetheless there are ritual differences that have a purpose, right? There's a reason why this particular ritual is given to the Jews, right? It's a divine, notion why some rituals are given to some and some to others, okay? Then it goes on to say, then for their breaking of the covenant, they're disbelieving in the signs of God, which could certainly mean later prophets like Jesus and Mary, who are described as a sign of God. And their slaying of the prophets without right. It turns out that there are books of the prophets where minor prophets, are killed by some of the Israelites during moments of, religious corruption. Right? And for they're saying this, I thought was interesting. Sometimes it will just translate this, and they're saying our hearts are covered, but the term can also mean uncircumcised. And this is something that the Israelites also say in the book of Jeremiah. They say our hearts are uncircumcised. And it's a really interesting metaphor, right? It's like our hearts are covered over, we haven't revealed them, right? It's like saying we are circumcised in this ritual way, but our hearts remain uncircumcised. And so, again, many of the critiques of the Israelites in the Quran echo critiques that you already find in the Tanakh, right? They already find, not in the Torah, but usually in the books of the prophets. Okay. It doesn't critique, except in one place, which is a little iffy, it doesn't really critique Jewish theology, right? Because Jews also are monotheist in a very strict and straightforward way, like Muslims. Right? Okay. And then when it comes to Christians, the Quran generally has positive things to say about the moral and spiritual character of Christians. But it is critical of Christian theology, particularly of the Trinity and of the notion that Jesus is the Son of God. So there are places where it describes Christians as being people of good and upstanding moral character, people who are very compassionate and generous. It says the closest people in affection to you, believers, are Christians. But at the same, and it mentions certain Christians who recognize, when they hear the Quran, they recognize that it comes from God. They recognize its spiritual character. But the Quran is clearly critical, both of the notion of Trinity and of the notion that Jesus is either God or the Son of God. So here, O people of the book, do not exaggerate in your religion, nor utter anything concerning God save the truth. Verily, the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, notice it's Jesus, son of Mary, right? Always is Jesus, son of Mary in the Quran, was only a messenger of God and his word. Also interesting, right? Christians also consider Jesus to be the Messiah. They consider him to be the word of God, that he committed to Mary and a spirit from him. So all of the prophets that are mentioned in the Quran have, or let's say maybe not all of them, many of them have a kind of honorific title that they're given. Moses is Kalimullah, the one who speaks directly with God. Jesus is Ruhallah, the Spirit of God, literally based on this Quranic passage. So believe in God and his messengers and say not three. Refrain. It is better for you. God is only one God. Glory be to him that he should have a child, meaning glory be to him is like it would be terrible, right? SubhanAllah, in the sense he's way above the idea of having a child, right? Unto him belongs whatsoever is in the heavens and the earth, and God suffices as a guardian. So it's interesting that Muslims do believe many things about Jesus that are quite extraordinary, as I mentioned, I think, earlier. So they believe that he was born miraculously of Mary, who was a virgin. They believe in Mary's own miraculous conception. Mary's mother is herself unable to conceive a child, and she prays to God to give her a child, and when he does, she says, I'm going to dedicate this child to the temple, assuming it's going to be a boy. Right? It's not a boy. But nonetheless, God tells her to go ahead and bring her to the temple, which she does. So they believe that Mary's conception of Jesus happens after her encounter with the angel Gabriel. They believe that Jesus performed extraordinary miracles, not only curing the sick and raising the dead, but there's also a miracle that's attributed to Jesus in the in the Quran that's not in the Gospel, which is said that he would make a clay figure of a bird, and then he would blow on it, and it would become alive. Right? What does that remind you of? God creating Adam, right? I mean, it's about as close as it comes to God's method of creating. He creates Adam from clay, he breathes into him, and he becomes alive. So it's really extraordinary. And of course, no one else raises the dead. right? Except God and Jesus through God, right? All of these miracles that Jesus performs, though, it's quite clear where it mentions them that he does all of these things with the power of God. He's simply a manifestation of the power of God. But nonetheless, those are quite extraordinary things, right? In fact, there is a Christian, a non-canonical Christian gospel, the Gospel of Thomas, that talks about Jesus. It mentions the story of the clay bird and talks about Jesus in ways that are very similar to the Quran. And so there actually was this Muslim publishing house that picked that up and published that particular gospel, the Gospel of Thomas. They believe, as I said, many extraordinary things about Jesus. They don't believe Jesus was killed on the cross. Right? They believe that it's unclear exactly what happened, but something happened so that it appeared that he was killed on the cross. It says in the Quran, literally, he wasn't slain and he wasn't crucified, but shubiha lahum, it appeared so to them. It appeared to everyone else that Jesus had been killed on the cross, and in fact he hadn't. Rather, he was raised, he ascended directly up to heaven. So Jesus hasn't died from the Muslim perspective, and yet he's mortal. And so he will, in fact, Muslims believe, come back at the end of time, and he will die, right, and become mortal and be raised along with everyone else. Right? So you can see, again, Jesus is an extraordinarily important prophet for Muslims, given very extraordinary powers. But at the same time, those things that are really important to Christian doctrine, like the Trinity and Jesus being the Son of God and being identified with God and dying on the cross, and therefore, being the vehicle of salvation for people's sins. I mean, those are really essential, but they're not there in Islam. Yes, Elena?
Just to clarify, because I know these questions that I have. So, from the perspective of the Quran, when Jesus, is he put to death by the Roman government still, or is that?
It doesn't mention the Romans. Actually, it says that the Jews claim that they killed Christ. Right. So it's actually part of that long, see, it's 171, it's actually part of that same passage that I quoted earlier, or a continuation of that discussion. But it says, but they did not kill him and they did not crucify him, but it appeared that way unto them. Right? Which is, it's interesting. I mean, what's the divine purpose of making it appear that way to someone? It's hard to know. Yeah.
So does that mean that, because I think part of the rhetoric of being the 3 days resurrection aside is that the government or the people of Jesus' society condemned him to death.
Yeah.
And is that acknowledged, that whether or not he died literally by them?
Yeah. I mean, you can go and read this particular passage, but it does not go into that kind of detail, right? As I said, with many of these stories, it doesn't go into detail. So the commentary tradition, the Islamic commentary tradition, does expand upon this idea. It talks about, for example, the fact that some people say that Judas took his place willingly or unwillingly, that the person on the cross was made to look like Christ. I mean, there are various explanations, but there's not one explanation other than it involves some kind of divine shifting of form that made it appear that Jesus was actually crucified. Okay. Yes, Laura.
What's the relationship between, if Muslims believe that Jesus will return at the end of time, what's the relationship between Jesus' return and the Mahdi?
And the Mahdi. Yeah, they're connected, right? So sometimes people will say they are here at the same time. Some hadith traditions say they're here at the same time, or the Mahdi will come and prepare the way for Christ. There are traditions that say that when Christ comes back, he'll pray behind the Mahdi in Jerusalem. So there's not just one conception of what's going to happen, but they both play a role in that final in the final events of time.
In the Quran, though, like specifically, like, because it leads me to believe that you say that there's different like narratives of what's going to happen.
Right.
That like something ambiguous is said in the Quran, and then
Well, there's a place. There are more than one place. I think 2 places where Jesus says that God's blessings be upon me the day that I'm born, the day that I die, and the day that I'm raised again. Right. So it's an acknowledgement that somehow he is going to die and be raised. Right. But it doesn't tell that intermediate story. How does he go from ascending into heaven to dying? And that's what's filled out in the Quranic commentary and in the Hadith about the Mahdi and the events of the end of time.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I've gotten ahead of myself here. Okay. All right. So then there are some contradictory things again, or might appear initially, I should say, contradictory things. But it's important to try to understand them, that the Quran says about the relationship with Jews and Christians. So this is often quoted again in very negative stories about Islam. O you who believe, take not Jews and Christians as protectors or protecting friends. It's that same word, awliya, that we had where it said the male and female believers are protecting friends of one another. It's the same word, awliya. They are the protectors of one another, and whosoever takes them as protectors, surely he is of them. He's one of them. The idea, sometimes this will be translated as take not Jews and Christians as friends. And that really does not make sense, not only in the context of Islamic history, but in the next verse I'll show you Muslim men can marry Jewish and Christian women. How can you take someone as your husband or your wife, but you can't be friends with them? It doesn't make any sense. So the tradition says that this verse came down at a time when Muslims had just emigrated, or shortly after they had emigrated to Medina, and their community was under threat. They did not know that they were going to survive. It didn't look good. The Meccans were still very powerful, and they were putting together alliances against Muhammad. And so some of the Muslims, particularly the newly converted Muslims in Medina, thought, well, maybe we should try to protect ourselves in the event that Medina is overrun and the community is destroyed. And they went and they made alliances, they made pacts with some of the Jewish tribes around, saying, look, if this happens, we're with you, right? Like, you're going to protect us. This is a tribal system where if, a powerful tribe offered you their protection, right, you were protected. And so the tradition says that this was a statement against doing that, right? You can't hedge your bets. If you're a Muslim, you throw in your lot with the Muslims. You make your destiny the destiny of Muslims. You stand loyal to your community. You don't sort of play this kind of double game. Right? That's what they say. Nonetheless, it also really, I think, clearly establishes the idea that there are communities that are self-supporting. Right? There's the Jewish community, there's the Christian community, there's the Muslim community. And they should act as self-contained communities.